They knew Bethlehem was in the hands of the Philistines. They knew an enemy garrison stood there. They knew the road to that well could become a road to death. But they did not hesitate. 3 men, 1 desire, and a journey that could cost them everything. Steel struck steel.
There is an intruder in the fortress!
The Philistines surrounded them, but the 3 mighty men broke through. They fought through the enemy lines. They pressed forward when the odds said they should fall. They kept moving when their bodies screamed for them to stop. 3 men against an army. 3 warriors. 3 lives shaped by battle. 3 men whose courage had been tested in fire. Before he was a king, before the crown, before the songs of Israel echoed his name, he was a fugitive. A man hunted through the wilderness like a wild animal, yet carrying a promise no spear could destroy. This is the story of King David and the warriors who refused to leave him. Not an army of the wealthy, not trained palace soldiers, but broken men forged into legends in the caves of desperation. Israel was once again unstable. Saul, the first king, had fallen into jealousy and fear, and David, anointed but not yet appointed, was forced into the shadows of the wilderness. Caves became his throne room. Dust became his crown. And there, in the darkness of Adullam, something unexpected happened. Men began to gather, not heroes, not noble sons, but men in debt, distress, and disappointment, men who had nothing left to lose. And David became their captain.
Men of Israel, stand firm. With courage and faith, we shall overcome this darkness.
From that moment, they were no longer abandoned. They were becoming something else. They were becoming mighty. They were called David's mighty men, not because of their reputation, but because of their loyalty. Among them were names that would echo through generations. Abishai, fierce in battle, known for striking down enemies when others hesitated. Benaiah, who fought lions in snowy pits and overcame warriors twice his strength.
Rag! Die, monster!
And others, silent legends whose deeds were never fully recorded, yet whose courage shaped a kingdom. David did not just lead them. He shaped them in caves, in exile, in hunger, in fear. A time came when Israel groaned under Philistine oppression. The enemy camped in the Valley of Giants, and hope once again began to fade. David was no longer a boy with a sling. He was a leader of warriors, and they followed him, not to safety, but into war.
Time is upon us. We stand ready.
David said, and that was enough.
For glory.
They rose, from caves to cliffs, from exile to battlefields, from rejection to resistance. The Philistines mocked Israel's weakness, unaware that hidden in the wilderness was a storm gathering shape. Around him stood men who had chosen to follow him into the darkness. His mighty men, warriors forged in battle, men who had faced death and refused to bow before it. Their swords had tasted war, their bodies carried its scars.
For glory! For freedom!
And their loyalty to David had been tested again and again. Before David remembered the water of Bethlehem, before the journey into enemy territory began, there were 3 men who stood beside him, not ordinary soldiers, not men who followed because they had to. They were warriors forged by hardship, men who had stared into the face of death and refused to step back. The first was Jashobeam, a warrior whose name was feared among Israel's enemies. A man who had stood against armies and carried the strength of countless battles upon his shoulders. The second was Eleazar, whose sword had become an extension of his own hand. A warrior who once fought until his hand grew weary, yet refused to release his weapon until victory was won. The third was Shammah, a man who stood when others fled. When fear surrounded him and the battlefield emptied, he remained planted, fighting for what was entrusted to him. 3 warriors, 3 lives shaped by battle, 3 men whose courage had been tested in fire. Then, one day at the stronghold of Adullam, something unexpected happened. The wilderness was merciless. The sun burned over the barren hills. Dust filled the air, and the heat drained the strength from every man. David sat beneath the shadow of the rocks. His lips were dry. His eyes wandered toward the distant horizon, and beyond those hills lay Bethlehem, his hometown, the place where he had been a shepherd boy, the place where he had watched over his father's sheep, the place where Samuel had poured oil upon his head and anointed him for a destiny he could not yet see. David remembered the hills,
Thank you, Father.
the fields, the days of his youth, and most of all he remembered the water, the cool water from the well beside the gate of Bethlehem. And David spoke softly, almost as if speaking only to himself. "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem."
The well by the gate.
It was not a command. It was not an order. It was simply the longing of a thirsty man remembering home. But 3 of his mighty men heard him.
David longs for the water from Bethlehem. The journey will not be easy. Then we will bring it to him.
They knew Bethlehem was in the hands of the Philistines. They knew an enemy garrison stood there. They knew the road to that well could become a road to death. But they did not hesitate. 3 men, 1 desire, and a journey that could cost them everything. The moon hung over the valley. Enemy fires burned across the darkness. Philistine soldiers guarded the roads. Weapons glimmered beneath the torchlight. The 3 warriors watched from the shadows. They knew what waited for them. Yet they moved forward, step by step, closer, closer, until there was no turning back.
You should be on your guard post.
We need to break their defense. I will go for the well. You both can defend me.
The silence of the night exploded into violence. Steel struck steel.
There is an intruder in the fortress!
The Philistines surrounded them, but the 3 mighty men broke through. They fought through the enemy lines. They pressed forward when the odds said they should fall. They kept moving when their bodies screamed for them to stop. 3 men against an army, and still they advanced. Until at last, they reached Bethlehem, and beside it was the well. The very well David had remembered. One of the warriors lowered the container into the darkness. The rope slipped through his hands deeper and deeper, until splash water. He pulled the container upward. Cool water glistened beneath the moonlight. They had done it. They had the water. But they were not finished. They still had to return. And once again, they fought through the darkness, through the enemy lines, through the danger. They carried the water as they fought their way back. Until finally, in the distance, a small light appeared. David's camp. They had made it. 3 warriors emerged from the darkness. Their clothes were torn. Their bodies were exhausted. Their weapons carried the marks of battle, but they were alive, and in their hands was water, water from Bethlehem. David looked up. He saw the 3 men. His expression changed. He looked at their faces, then at their wounds. He understood. They had not simply brought him a drink. They had risked their lives for a longing he had spoken only once. David slowly took the vessel. He looked down at the water, and he could not drink, because suddenly, the water was no longer just water. It had a price. The price was the lives of men who had been willing to die for him. David lifted his eyes toward heaven and said, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this." Then he looked at the water and spoke again. "Is this not the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives?" Silence filled the camp. David knew what he had to do. He raised the vessel and poured the water out before the Lord. The precious water disappeared into the thirsty earth. Drop by drop gone. What David had desired, he gave back to God. Because David understood something that night. The water was precious, not because of where it came from, but because of what it had cost. 3 men had crossed enemy lines. 3 men had faced death. 3 men had risked everything for their king, and David would not treat their sacrifice as something ordinary. He poured it out before the Lord, because some gifts are too sacred to consume. Some sacrifices are too precious to take for granted. And some acts of loyalty become offerings before God. David had once stood before Goliath, a young shepherd facing a giant. He had faced armies. He had survived Saul's pursuit. He had lived through caves, battles, betrayal, and exile. But perhaps one of the greatest lessons of his journey was learned beside a cup of water. A king is not great because people are willing to die for him. A king is great when he understands the value of the lives entrusted to him. David asked for water, but his mighty men gave him something far greater. They gave him their courage. They gave him their loyalty. They gave him their devotion. And David gave their sacrifice back to God. The water of Bethlehem became a testimony of courage, a testimony of loyalty, a testimony of sacrifice. 3 men had crossed enemy lines for the longing of their king's heart, and their names may have faded into the pages of history, but their sacrifice did not, because Scripture remembers them simply as the 3 mighty men. And somewhere beneath the ancient hills of Bethlehem, the water they carried was poured into the earth, but the story of their courage was poured into eternity. These things did the 3 mighty men. Samuel 23:17.